Good morning. I was like, just a moment ago, I was like, why is there no one here? I mean, it's not like someone hasn't given them like this massive project to do by Sunday. And I was like, okay, fair enough. There's this old thing that we used to do when I used to work in theatre. It was like, look, if the performers and the crew backstage and everything outnumber the audience, then you call off the show. And I was like, do I, don't I, and stuff. And I thought, okay, maybe I should still do it. People might watch this later. Not that this actual talk isn't recorded previously, and I could probably just show last terms or possibly the term before as well, because I think I did this recorded in second term and first term. But anyway, we've got a couple of people here now, so I'm going to deliver this talk to you, even though there's only a few of you here at the moment, and we'll see if other people are interested in watching it later. Kat, thank you very much, but I do understand that part of the reason why people are not necessarily here on a Friday morning is the work that I gave you to do. So I think, especially considering I said this is optional, and people know that they don't have to view it now. It's not something that has to be learnt and listened to for the remainder of COMP1511. It's more of a long-term thinking thing. Having said that, there's a lot that goes into our mindset and our attitude towards not just programming, but how we're going to approach life and work in general, which is going to change a lot of how we get things done and how easy it is for other people to work with us. This talk was built up over many years based on a lot of conversations I had with students, and combining that with conversations I had with friends who were hiring, sometimes hiring my students. So there was this really, really interesting thing about trying to see where students would go afterwards and the troubles that students were facing while studying, and piecing that together with the views and expectations of the people who you could say had been those students sort of 10, 15, 20 years before, depending on who I'm talking to, got lots of friends, different ages. And what people thought was the important things for getting through a professional life. And I don't really want to push this too hard, that what you need to do with your degree, because I think a lot of the degrees at the moment that we've got in COMP1511 are computing degrees, a lot of the other degrees are engineering degrees. There's a lot of people also who are in COMP1511 this term. It changes depending on the terms, like different times of the year, different people are involved in a sense. There's a lot of people even doing this as Gen Eds. So chances are the advice I give you today is the only advice you'll ever use from COMP1511, and then the rest of it, all the computing stuff, will be like, hey, that was interesting. I did one term of computing and I learned a bit about how computing works, and so that's all I need to know. And so this advice, hopefully, it carries a lot further than just the computing world, and will show us a little bit about what it means to really work. It's like a really vague open term like that, but I think as I get into it, you'll get where I'm going with this. So, I think one day I'm going to go through all my slides and change them all so that this top corner here doesn't have any words in it. Because a lot of these slides were made for when I was teaching face-to-face, and I had the whole space and wasn't putting my face in it anyway. But okay, so what we're talking about here is what it means to be a professional engineer. And whether this is like, maybe I shouldn't have said engineer there, maybe I should have just said, what does it mean to be a professional? And if you've seen Anchorman, hopefully you will appreciate the irony in this image here. So Will Ferrell plays a news host who is in no way professional. So that's a little joke. When I was talking to people who are either looking at hiring people or thinking about what made them successful in their work and happy with what they're doing, a few things seem to kind of resonate and repeatedly resonate in things that we were talking about. And it's really funny talking to people who would hire grads, for example, like hire students that have just finished and maybe have no experience yet. And there are a few things that we were saying were really crucial to thinking about whether or not they would take on a candidate. And other people were talking about things that got them through tough situations at work. And it ended up being that these four things were the things we started to think about as being what would be important long term in maintaining fulfilling work. So one of them is communication. I've got slides on each of these. So when we're talking about communication, we're talking about not just conversation skills. Like, we're not just talking about me here being like a professional public speaker and I just deliver speeches to people. We're not just talking about that kind of communication. Talking about being able to send and receive information, being able to convert what you're talking about into a manner that can be understood by people who don't have the same expertise as you. A good team has a mixture of different expertises, right? So in any kind of software team, there's a certain percentage of people who are just coders, right? And it's not really that high. It's like 30-40% of people who are the ones who are just writing code all the time. There are like, I don't know, I was about to call them software engineers, but software engineers do all kinds of other stuff as well. We've got people who are constantly watching over whether the work we're doing is aiming towards our goals or not. We've got other people who are just looking at timeline, looking at what we're doing and when we're doing it and making sure everyone's in the right place, right? And so all these different skill sets are going to come together. And being able to communicate between these skill sets of people becomes very important, because if we're not all aligned on the ideals of what we're doing, we start to have different expectations for what we should do and what other people should do. And anytime humans have different expectations, things are going to go weird. So communication is one of those important things. Teamwork also is another thing. And this is something that comes up a lot when there's conflict between people. Again, often it's a mix of expectations. Being able to work in a team is a push and pull thing, right? Know when you need to take the lead on something, but know when you need to relinquish the lead. And a good team has this kind of ability to move things around. Strict hierarchy is not always necessary. And even in a situation where there's a strict hierarchy, having an undisputed leader who knows when to take the expertise from different people in the team is very, very important. We talked a little bit about even piecing together teams and the attitude of people in the team, and how that can be often more important than the competency of the people in the team itself. Resilience is a buzzword. Every now and then I think about whether or not resilience is the right word for this point here, because it is a technical term for people's ability to deal with hardship, in a sense. And I think it still resonates here. But what I'm talking about when I'm talking about resilience here is, can you do the thing that you want to do without it taking so much of a toll on your emotional self and your mental psyche, and leave you in a position where you can't continue doing it? So a lot of the time, I think this is an interesting one, that students, when they get their first job, are very excited. I still remember what it was like for me when I got my first job and I got a salary for the first time. And it was very exciting in the beginning because I was making more money than I'd ever made before. I felt like I was vindicated. The work I'd done as a student had led me towards being respected as as someone who could be hired as a full-time professional. And I did it for a while, but I didn't like the work. And that didn't really even have anything to do, like I wasn't being mistreated at work or anything. I was lucky. I wasn't, there was no particular harassment or anything strange like that. I just didn't really resonate with the work itself. And so I started to kind of just dislike it regardless of what it was. And so I don't know if that definitely comes into resilience, but it's sort of part of that. I think if you're motivated to do something, it changes the way you're going to approach it. And then number 4, so there's these 4 pillars of things that are important. Number 4 is the technical skills. And it's interesting the technical skills come last in this list. I'll talk about that more later. But this is kind of the order in which people are going to be hired into a company. I mean, resilience, they may not even be hired for resilience, which is a shame. Resilience ends up becoming often the responsibility of the individual. So one of the most difficult things to teach people who, who their dream is to get a job, is to teach people how to walk away from one. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. It's a difficult decision. I was going to say, funny allegory that I've not thought of before is those of you who have dated a lot of people in your life up to this point will actually know more about what it's like. So a lot of today is going to be a bit about that kind of life experience and how life experience can equate to how well or how badly you're going to do at a job. So if you've had a messy breakup, or you've been in a relationship that you needed to get out of for a while, but you didn't for some reason, you were kind of caught up in things and stuff, then you actually know a bit about what it's like to leave a job. So often when you leave a job, you still have friends there. These are like friends of the partner that you're leaving as well. You're like, I like them, but if I break up with this person, I'm never going to see them again, You get that kind of feeling as well. So yeah, there's a lot of things I used to always talk to people about. If you get experience, it's always going to be worth something. So let's treat life and work and life and study like a RPG computer game. I don't know if anyone was there yesterday. I gave a talk about computer games. It's probably why my voice doesn't sound that great now, because my 1 hour talk about computer games turned into a 4-hour talk on computer games that ended with me live streaming me playing games. So things got a little out of hand, but I think hopefully it was still interesting anyway. Today I am not going to go for 4 hours. We've got a 2-hour lecture limit here, and I'm not expecting to talk for a full 2 hours. Hopefully I can actually hold myself to that this time. So let's go through. I'm going to go into more detail into each of these 4 points. So, look, my face is in the right place. Communication is an interesting thing, right? Because this meme, I always love this meme. I've used this meme in other parts of COMP1511 as well. Is just a big argument between these two people. I've never actually seen the show or where this comes from, but I just really like the meme. We get this situation sometimes when we're working where part of our team is going to say, I wish we didn't have to spend so much time in meetings. I feel like the time I spend in meetings is wasted because I could have been working that whole time. And it's an attitude that we often carry as if we're in a very technical role in something, and I've been in that role before where I'm someone right at the forefront of what we're doing, where I'm actually writing the code to make stuff work, and it's really, really hard to break your concentration or pop out for a bit and think about something different. Probably why we don't have that many people live here today, because a lot of people are saying, I need to work on this assignment, But the interesting thing about working in a team that's working on solving problems is that you don't necessarily get more work done if you don't go to the meetings. Because if you don't go to the meetings, you don't know what problem we're solving. You're not on the same page as other people, and you don't have a proper understanding of what's happening. So I think that's one important thing to think about, is that there's an investment in knowing what you're doing. It's kind of like if I asked you to solve a lab problem in COMP1511 and I gave you 30 seconds to read it and said after you've read it you can't read it again, but you've got heaps of time to work on it, chances are a lot of you are not going to get it right. So that when you actually finish it, so especially if I don't give you auto tests and you finish it and then you run it, something's not going to work. Whereas if I say the opposite, you have to go back and read the spec, so that back and forth over time, 20% of the total time you spend on this was going back and reading the spec. In the same amount of time, those two people, the one that was actually forced to waste some of their time keeping going back and sort of, in a sense, communicating with the reason you're doing something, will end up much more likely with a successful solution than the person that knuckles down and spends all their time working and not going back and checking on things. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about, because a lot of people think meetings are a waste of time. But what they really are is an investment in time that is going to save much more time in the long run. I think I've given you this concept before when I've talked about styling your code. The idea that committing early in order to take more time to make something work better is going to save you more time in the long run. Max there's talking about the difference between a small error in the code taking 5 minutes or 5 hours. We can actually change that a little bit by making sure we invest in knowing what our problem is. The other thing that we're going to do as well, if we get really, really deep in computing, we can get really, really into the flow of communicating with a machine, which is talking to your machine via code, in a sense. But every time we're writing code, there's always going to be humans involved in some way. And we haven't yet reached a point in computer science where our code will not come in contact with humans. I mean, just the fact that we're writing it means it's sort of in contact with humans already. It's going to be ourselves that come back to it. When we get too deep into the communicating with computers all the time, it's really hard to necessarily know if we're doing something that other people actually need. And so I think one of the things that we want to practice is the ability to actually communicate what we're doing in our field of expertise to people who don't have that same expertise. Because if we can't communicate with people who are also working on other parts of the problem, we don't know if we're all working on the same problem. So if this is just like a one-way communication thing, a manager can keep telling you what to do. And then you do it, but what you've done is your interpretation of what the manager said, rather than you being able to communicate back and say, here is what I've done so far. I understand that you don't know code, so I need to explain it to you in a way that you will understand. And these quick conversations back and forth can really get us all together on the same page. And if we all understand as a team working on something what we're working on, it makes it much easier for us to actually get these things done. Oops, clicking on the wrong window. So I've got a lot of text here, which is the same thing. Let me just check the points here and see if there's any points that I missed as I was talking there. Raman's saying, if you've ever worked with engineers who are writing code, I'm just curious, do you remember what language they were coding in? Personally, I guess I have worked as a hands-off team leader a bit, but I've also worked as the programmer a bit. It tends to be like, this is not a guaranteed thing, but some people's career paths will follow this thing where you start off writing the code. As you get a better understanding of the context of how we solve larger problems, you start doing less code, but helping multiple coders do their code. I would say that most of the time, if you're in that kind of position that I was in, you'll know what languages people are using. You may not even know how to use the language, but you'll have an idea of what's going on. I don't know if you're wondering about specific languages, Raman, that people have used in the past while I've been working with them. I mean, mostly for me, it's been C++, Python, and C#. I'm very, very much in the C-based languages, but I don't think there's any reason why I couldn't also work with a team that was using Java or something like that. I think that the choice of language tends to come after you see the problem, right? So you find the problem and you think, how do we solve this problem? And then you reach into your toolbox and you pick up the language that matches the problem best. So I'm not sure if you are asking what languages are more popular nowadays, or you're asking whether the manager knows about the programming languages. This will really, really depend on the management style, in a sense. So you can have some people who are very, very focused on what is the output and how does it affect our users. And that person can be vital to how your team is going to come together without knowing anything about code. And sometimes it's even better to have those people who know nothing about code, because then you've got a separation of what you're doing, separation of who's doing what work. And at the same time, the person that doesn't know anything about code might be really useful to your team, because they're not going to get caught in the programmer trap. The classic programmer trap is, there's a really interesting way to do this thing that we're doing, so let's go do the interesting thing. And then halfway through you realize the interesting thing doesn't apply to your original problem. It's just really intellectually stimulating for the people doing programming, because programming is such an intellectually stimulating thing to do. It's got creative problem solving. It's got a machine with so many different levers you can pull that you can just pick and choose which ones you want to use. So programming can be fun with no purpose. You know, we can program we can make up ideas that we want to code and just code. We'll enjoy the coding. And so it's nearly infectious in that way, and it'll carry you off into weird paths where I've said this before when we're talking about problem solving. We will end up not solving the problem that actually sits in front of us because we got caught up in something really cool to do instead. If anyone has that kind of tendency to do those things, at least in assignment 1 we have this Hall of Fame thing where you can be like, I finished the assignment, now I want to do this random thing, and we're letting you kind of explore, because I think it's worth it while you're learning to explore, but when you're on the clock and trying to solve a problem, random exploration's not always a great idea. Okay, so what am I saying here in my points? Yeah, so we're talking about shared understanding for problem solving. That's good. And this funny thing is, like, the more we communicate with computers, the more risk we have of this is a bit extreme, treating people like machines, but we may actually get to that point where we get stuck in logic, and human beings, as much as we can use logic a lot of the time, we're not just logical beings. We've got a lot more nuance than that, a lot more interesting things than just pure logic. I always go back to like Star Trek and the difference between Vulcans and humans. It's subtle, but it's really there. Yeah, I think I covered all of this here, so let's move on to the next point. I need an auto thing on my slides that just moves my streaming software around of where my face is. So teamwork. My memes are getting old, but this one was really funny a couple of years ago. I think this is a painting of the scene from The Predator between Arnie and Carl Weathers, I think. It's either from that or it's from one of the Rocky movies. But anyway, it's just the funny thing about like this bros getting together. So, one of the weirdest things I think about a university education is we're trying to make sure that each of you as individuals picks up a set of skills. Once you leave university, and even a lot of times during, you will be put together in teams to do things. One of the downsides of us trying to make sure that everyone learns stuff is that people get a kind of a mindset that programming might be an individual thing. It might be something that you do alone. And the downside to that is when you get out into the real world, it's never like that. It's very, very rare that you will go solo on a project. So, and this is always the sad thing I say when people say they hate group work. at university, and I can understand the reasons why you hate group work, because sometimes there's not enough skin in the game. So when I say skin in the game, I mean people, when you're working on stuff, everyone's job might be on the line during a project, in which case people tend to put a lot more effort into things because they know that there's a great deal of risk. Because when your job's on the line, your source of income is on the line, which means maybe the rent that you need to pay is at risk, or there are family members you're supporting for some reason and they become at risk if you don't do the work that you're supposed to do. And I think that puts a lot more pressure on people than being a student does. So when you're a student, sometimes in group work, people don't necessarily do as much work as other people, and people feel like they're having to carry other people and things. However, when we get down to it in the real world, that's always going to be the case. We're always going to be working in teams, and there's always going to be a differing level of skill in the teams. So it's interesting that when people say they hate group work, I have to say to them, unfortunately, it's probably going to be the rest of your career. It's going to be working in groups. Hopefully what you can get to, though, is you can get to a point where you all understand each other well enough that you can work as a team. There was some experiments done years ago about teamwork, where a large selection of people were put together and then put into small teams and asked to perform specific tasks. All of these people were kind of vetted beforehand by testing their capability in the particular task. So for example, this could be, I look at all of the students in COMP1511 and look at your marks at this point in the course. So who's completed all the labs and challenge exercises? And let's say we've marked assignment 1 already. Obviously we haven't, because you haven't all handed it in. But we look at the assignment 1 marks, and what we do is we form groups based on who got higher marks in the assignment and who got lower marks in the assignment. And when you think about it that way, you think, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Putting people with different marks levels together might be weird, because then someone's going to have to carry someone else. So if they all got the same marks, then they should all work the same. You already know where this is going because the slide says it. They did another way of putting groups together where they let people spend some time with each other, and they let them kind of assess each other on who they wanted to spend more time with. And then they found that the teams that got along well, and this isn't just like who you want to spend time with, this is deeper than that. It's often about shared goals. It's often about the same level of commitment to a purpose. The teams that had that same level of commitment, and the teams that spent time building relationships between themselves, are the ones that were successful. Whether or not people had aptitude for the task at hand didn't have a huge amount of relevance to the final outcome. And that's super interesting, because you would think that we just hire purely for skill and then we'll get a good outcome. But when that was done, we didn't necessarily get a team that was actually going to work together, so a team that wasn't going to compromise for each other. I mean, this is a generalization, but what if those people who are very good at something have a particular technique they want to use for things, and it's different between people? You put those people together in a team, you create a clash between the way they work. They would have been fine if they were on different teams. Or maybe they're fine if they're good friends and they know they work differently, and they could say, let's use your way this time rather than my way or something. You know, if we have this kind of compromise, then things can work. But if we don't check to see whether we could make that compromise, then it's very much harder to do. And so when we're thinking about being able to work in a team, we can actually help that happen. So even if we're not hired as a team, we can build that team up from the inside. So we can do even just really simple things, like just spend time with people when there's no pressure to work. One of the funny things that I heard about that people were doing when they were setting up a new tech team, or they're setting up a new startup or something like that, is there's always a period before you get rolling, before you've figured out exactly how you're doing what you're doing and you start actually doing the work. if you make sure you're social in that time, spend some time with everyone where you're not aiming at solving any problems, you're just going to hang out. It's really funny. I was thinking about that now in this day and age, and I was just like, oh, let's play Among Us. And I was just like, I'm not sure that's the right one. You know, like when we talk about team building games, I don't know if anyone's played Among Us so far. Among Us is a game where there are a bunch of people together and there's one person working against the rest of the team, and so within the team you get a situation where everyone has to try to figure out who is the person that is working against the team, and you do this kind of by like pointing fingers at each other and saying that person is suspicious, that person's suspicious, and all this kind of stuff. So I think a game like that's really funny because that's got more likelihood to break up a team than actually put it together. But there's plenty of other things that people can do to get together, even if it's something as simple as like everyone gives a presentation and you rotate through everyone, just short presentations about a hobby they have outside of work, and then people just get to talking about things and get to know each other better. And getting to know each other better means you're going to treat people like a human. You know, that whole thing about human versus machine. Sometimes we have a habit of treating the people around us like they are not completely human, and if we were thinking about it as a computer game, they're a computer generated character, like an NPC we call it in the game. NPC stands for non-player character, and so we start to treat other actual humans like non-player characters because we're just too focused on our own thing. The more you get to know people, the less likely it is that you're actually going to be doing that. So I've got a slide here on teamwork as well. And there are some things I haven't spoken about yet that I want to cover in here. So questions about how we want to approach working in a team. This involves, can we share ideas with other people? Can we actually get to the point where ideas aren't attached to people? So it's not, that was your idea and it was good. This is my idea and it's good. Because the more we attach ourselves to ideas, the harder it is for us to throw them away. And ideas do need to be thrown away sometimes, right? So this kind of compromise and this kind of sharing of the thinking of the team is important. So are we okay with working with other people's ideas? If I have a good idea about how I'm going to solve something, is it okay if someone else has a good idea about how to solve something and we use theirs? Sometimes that's a really hard thing to do. Sometimes the more successful you are, the more you trust your own ideas over other people, and the harder it is for you to actually have a good conversation about these things. Can we follow someone else's style and structure? Yeah, so this is an interesting one because I've been doing this to you and trying to present it to you in a way that this is important. So in something really simple, like code style, can we just work with someone else's code style? And I think this is a really funny thing because it's really easy to do that. All you need to do is change the way you format your code. You don't even need to change the way you think about your code. It's just the way you format it. But it's still something that we can have trouble with because it's asking us to make a compromise on the way that we would normally work. And what I'm saying is it's actually very, very good to be able to make those compromises, to be able to give to other people. So the other thing is, can we actually make sure that what we do is accessible to other people and we can work for the other people in our team? Because this is something that comes down to the teams that are the most successful long term, the teams that stick together for years and have, you know, multiple successful projects together are not necessarily the teams that are focused on delivering the best product in the short term or making sure that the product is always making money or anything like that, you know. It's actually the teams that are making sure that they uplift each other in the team, because when it comes down to it long term, the better you're going to be is how good you're going to be is based on how well your team is motivated and how much they care about going through what they're doing. And the best way for us all to kind of care about each other within our team is knowing that we've got each other's backs. And you know that, right? Because when I say we've got each other's backs, you know that feeling. Well, I hope we all know that feeling, because that should be the kind of relationship you have with your friends. Like, no matter what happens, if I'm out of it, you know, if I'm not handling what I'm doing, I've got people who I can lean on. I've got people who I can say, look, I can't handle this situation. I need a hand. And you've got a friend who will come along and say, hey, let's chill for a bit. Let's just, you know, figure this stuff out. We can get you through this problem. If you get that within your work team, you know that you're always in a safe environment. You can work your best, and you know that the people around you are always going to be with you and support you. And in the end, long term, that's how you get the best work out of someone. It's not really about how hardcore your technical skills are when you get hired. Ironically, I'm going to talk about this later, is that a friend of mine who is a software team manager, so she's managing like sort of 20-30 people usually, she's like, I don't hire for technical capability. I hire for the potential for future technical capability. So I hire someone who's ready to learn, and I hire someone who's keen about the company and getting into the project. And then after that, we see how good they are technically, and then we say, all right, everything that you know up to this point, you're probably not even going to use. We'll teach you what you need to know as you go along. So it's all that interesting stuff like that. Let me pop out for a second because Eric's asking a question there. Oh, Eric. Eric says you love my stuff. Thank you very much. That's really nice of you to say that. Not sure if you're covering this later, but I'm doing this as an elective in my last term as a non-STEM student and liking it a lot more than I thought I would. I'm really glad, Eric. I think it's a lot of fun when people discover programming, and it makes me feel happy because the course is designed to try to appeal to people who have never seen programming before, and also give some genuine insight to people who have been programming for most of their lives, because I know that we're getting both in a course like this. And you're asking, is transitioning into programming later on something that's feasible or common? It's 100% feasible. How common it is, it's common enough that I know several people that have done it. So it's not a surprise. And I think that might just be because it's the lure of the tech industry. The tech industry has very, very positive working conditions, and very high salary. You can get a significant amount of fulfillment out of the kind of work that you're doing. It depends where you are in the tech industry, but lots of things in the tech industry, you can see the effect they're having on the world. So if someone works for Google, for example, like, let's use Google because they're just a very, very big company. They can see people using Google products all the time. You know, we might be using the search engine or Gmail and stuff like that, and so you kind of get to see, it's like, oh, I worked on that kind of stuff, you know, or I worked at the company where, you know, all these people around the world are getting a little bit more enrichment out of their lives because of what I did. It helps your motivation to be doing stuff like that. So examples that I've got are friends. I have one of the tutors, actually, you might know if you've got them as a tutor, used to work in finance, and was there for a few years and then decided to come back to uni and retrain as a computer scientist. I have a friend who was an aeronautical engineer. So we always joke with him that saying that things aren't rocket science, because he literally was a rocket scientist. So he was working at building aircraft and things like that, and then he got to a certain point and was just like, I'm a little bored of the aircraft engineering industry. I want to change. And it was just really, really funny because his partner, I actually went to uni with both of them. She'd been a computer science student the whole time and has like a full-on career as a software engineer. And he kind of didn't get there until like 5-10 years after her, but now he is a software engineer and he's working in a company here in Sydney. So it's like, it's funny how people can shift around, but doing a shift later into programming is not super difficult. Like, it's possible. And I've seen people shift at lots of different times. So one of the other tutors actually finished an accounting degree And COMP1511 was the last subject they did. So it wasn't the last, it was in the last term, but it was basically their final gen ed. They had a grad position lined up as well, and they re-enrolled in university in computer science. So instead of taking the guaranteed job that they had lined up, they said, I want to do computer science. So it happens. That's like my favorite example, because that's like me me feeling like in COMP1511 I've managed to bring someone in from the point at which they had the best possible situation to be able to leave university, and we managed to entice them into computing because it was so interesting. And this person took to computing really naturally as well. I've seen their work and it was just like, wow, you look like you've been doing this for years, and they hadn't. But everyone's going to be different, right? Some people will fall into computing by accident, just because they find they have a technical aptitude for it, and they'll start doing more work alongside programmers and things, and eventually do some short courses online and stuff like that, and find themselves coding. There's a lot of ways to learn how to program that isn't necessarily in a full 3 or 5 year university course or something like that. It's different. You do a university course, you learn these kind of deep fundamentals, so it's slightly different. But in terms of getting enough going so that you can apply your problem solving to getting a computer to run it, totally doable. So yeah, Eric, up to you. There's a lot of options. I should also say that when we think about careers, when we think about your lifetime and your careers, on average, someone who is in university now, I can't remember what the statistic is, it's 5 to 10 careers in your life. I think it's somewhere around there. Don't quote me on it because I don't know exactly, but it doesn't matter because the number's higher than 1. If we go back to, say, I don't know, like the 1940s or 50s or something like that, people were considered to have one career. So you'd train for one thing and you'd do that for your whole life, and then you'd retire at the end. Nowadays, we see people as capable of reskilling, capable of learning different things, capable of, and also at least given enough freedom to be allowed to follow what fulfills them. So me, for example, if I'd just left university and done what I was doing, I would be some kind of engineer. Now, I would still be some kind of software engineer. I worked as a systems engineer for a while, which is like a slightly less on coding and doing a lot of other stuff as well instead, for a few years, and I would be like, okay, that's committed, that's it, that's my work forever, but I got bored of it. Teaching was more fulfilling to me than engineering, and so I ended up spending a lot of time trying to get back into teaching and then coming back here and teaching. So it's interesting. So I think that you can have what you're talking about there, going to a grad job in a tech company but not on the programming side. It's actually a really, really good thing to think about, to be able to think about a future maybe in programming, right? So, and the nice thing about it is you can be patient about it. You can be like, I'm going to take this job and I'm going to learn a whole lot about how the company works, things, which is going to mean that if I decide to reskill into purely tech, into the programming, and go for a programming job later, it's going to be really easy for me to actually get into companies like this because I already know how they work. So I can stroll into the interview knowing kind of what's going to be in the interview, especially because I don't know what your non-tech job is in an interview, because there's any in this company, because if it's got anything to do with like HR, you're probably going to know how to ace the interview later to get hired. So yeah, little things like that, it's like you've got insider knowledge because you've already been in the company. Or if you've been in the company and then slots open up for programming, you say, can I transfer? I'm happy to retrain. Can I transfer over there? A company will often be more happy about moving people within the company than bringing new people in, because then it's like, this is someone we already trust. Someone we already trust. We know they're a highly intelligent, driven person, so if they want to go into this slightly other field of work, we know they're going to be good at it eventually. So we've already invested in this person. It's easy. Yeah. So yeah, like you're saying, it's wild, the whole 5-10 careers, because what have I done? I've been an AI researcher, a VR engineer. I mean, I would consider being a PhD student counts as something like that as well. And the things that people don't often know, I've also been a theatre production manager. So like I went off and did something completely different from computing for a while. And then being an educator is something completely different from that engineering. So like, I think I just counted 6. What was it? Wait, researcher, VR, what was the other one? It was the theatre production manager. Oh no, I guess it's 4 for the moment. I've got time. So I've got 4, and I'm sure that at some point I'm gonna say I would like to do something different, and then I'll move on and go do something else. I don't. It's really funny that I say that, because most lecturers have been here for like most of their lives. So, not most, but I know some of the lecturers. Some of the more famous ones in CSE have actually been at CSE for most of their working careers. I think that there's a draw to being a lecturer. There's a lot of fulfillment in teaching. So a lot of people like it, and they will keep doing it. All right, let's. Where am I going to put my face? Oh, over here. Let's look at this idea of resilience. And I think it's nice that we stopped for a moment there in between, because resilience is a very different thing from communication and teamwork. Communication and teamwork kind of go together. You kind of want both, and both come under the same sort of idea. But resilience is something else. So being good at working in a team and being good at communicating with people is something that you will try to learn. You try to build up these skills. People often call them soft skills. I don't like the term soft skills, because it's got this connotation that they're like not part of what's important. Like, people tend to think that the hard stuff is important and the soft stuff is not important. What that really means is there's technical things that you need to do, and then there's non-technical things you need to do, but they're still vitally important skills that you need to learn. They're harder to learn, because when you're teaching technical things, you can just give technical assessment to people. You can tell people that there is 100% right way to do things, and so people just do things the right way. As opposed to, there is no right way to communicate, because communication is between yourself and another human. There will be a right way to communicate, but the right way is going to be what fits between you and that one other person. So it's going to be different for every person you want to communicate really deeply with. So, there's difficulties there. I want to talk about dealing with difficulties in your work. And I think that this is my point out of the four pillars I'm talking about today. This is the most important one for you right now, because you're students right now. And we're in week 6 right now, which is like this weird notion of a week off. If we have 10 weeks to teach, and one of them is like this kind of rest week, there's no real rest in that. Because when we teach in 10 weeks, we're kind of... A 10-week learning cycle is a fast learning cycle. I think if someone wants to gain true mastery over something, the ability to get true mastery over a skill, I would say on average you're looking at sort of 2 years to attain true mastery over something. So 10 weeks is always going to be an abbreviation of that. So this week 6 may be partially a break, but I don't know about you, but I've worked way harder this week than I've worked in the first 5 weeks leading up to it. So I've delivered what amounts like 4 or 5 lectures worth of material this week, as opposed to the usual 2 lectures worth of material. And I do understand that most of you as students at the moment have been thrown under the bus, because all of your lecturers think that week 6 is a good time for a deadline. Trust me, I think the same thing, because I set the assignment due at the end of week 6 because it's a really good time in terms of how much you've learnt so far, and when you should get some feedback on how well you're doing. The downside is everyone comes to that same conclusion, and so you'll have multiple assignments due around week 6 or 7, that kind of thing. So what we get is the notion of the impossible situation. You will be put in a situation where you have 3 assignments due on the same day. And you know that sometimes your approach to these things is going to be, I can do this the night before. I can start this 1 or 2 days before and I'm going to make it out of this. But you will find yourself in the impossible situation like that. It's actually good training, because I have been in these situations where there were no marks, there was no wham to be worried about. There was, this project releases in 3 days, so we need your part of this project a week ago so that we can work on it. And then you say, well, that's what am I supposed to do with that information? You need my part of the project a week ago. I can't do anything about that. I am now in a situation where my deadline has moved behind where I am. Do I keep working on this thing, or do we give up now? And it's like, what do we do? This is literally an impossible situation. One of the funniest things about how I learnt originally to deal with impossible situations was completely outside of my degree, but with a good friend from my degree. We used to play a lot of pool, so we used to go to a local pub and play pool. So I don't know if people still do this, definitely not in the current climate. Actually, we might be opening up again to the point where people go to the pub, right? So you put your coin in the pool table and the balls come out, and then I think that maybe people know this game. I don't know. But you get into situations sometimes where, a lot of the time you're taking your shot and you look at it and you go, I'm just going to sink that ball there. It's reasonably simple. But sometimes you're going to be, there's all this stuff in the way. There's nothing I can do. And then I'm in a situation where I can't even hit the balls that I need to hit to try to sink them. The best I could do is bounce off the side and off the back and hit one. And just by then, I do not have that much physical control, nor that much instinctive grasp of geometry to actually be able to tell where my ball's going to be by the end. So I'm just going to hit it and hope. And a lot of people, when faced with that situation, will do something random. So they'll just aim randomly and they'll go, I'm just going to take the shot, whatever, deal with the problem later. So I'm not even gonna deal with this impossible situation. I'm just going to wait for it to go away. I came up with this way of approaching these things where I would make an outlandish plan with a very low percentage chance of success. But it was the best chance I had. So I was like, all right, I'm going to bounce off that side cushion. I'm going to hit that ball and it's going to sink in that pocket over there. Every now and then I would tell my friends these plans and I'm just like, you can't do that. And it's like, I don't know that I can't do that, but I'm going to try to do that anyway, because at least then I have a plan, and it's the best plan I can think of now that will lead me towards success, and I will act on that plan. So it didn't matter whether that succeeded or not, and when it did, it was amazing. But that's random chance. I don't bank on random chance. The thing that was important about that was, in a situation where all is lost, where things are impossible, I made a concrete plan for what I was going to do, and I followed that plan. So what I was doing was I was reacting to these impossible situations with a clear idea of what I was going to do and an intention to do the best that I could. And that kind of mindset, it's weird for me to have learnt that. I mean, I learnt it during my time at university, so I must have learnt something from the way I was being taught and stuff that brought me towards that idea. But I do love that I solidified that learning, while I was drinking and playing games with my friends, right? You don't realize how much you often learn during your time at university outside of your official courses. And this is why I'm trying to bring this into your official courses, right? However, this is kind of non-assessable. How do I assess whether you can do this resilience thing or not? And also, you don't need it yet. This is the kind of thing, the skills that you can build up over time. But this dealing with impossible situations got me to a mindset where I was never going to be driven into a panic mode. And so being able to do that in a really safe situation. So at the pool table, no one expected me to make that shot. No one was relying on me to make that shot. My annual salary was not at risk for my ability to make that or not. But what I could do is learn in an environment where there was no risk, and then eventually get to the point where when that happened at work, I was like, I've been here before. I have experience with this level of difficulty. I'll do what I can, and I know you needed this a week ago. I will get you what I consider to be the minimum necessary for you to get going by the end of the day, and then I'll keep working on it afterwards, and we'll link up again later and hope this thing gets to where it needs to be in the next few days for our release. These are the things I'm cutting out of what we're doing, like knowing how to remove things to be like, these are definitely not going to happen, they'll be in the first patch, you know, that kind of thing. I actually learned that in the theatre, because when I was working in theatre, you got this situation where it was like, hey, the audience is outside, they're going to be in here in 15 minutes, maybe you need to put the ladder and the power tools away because they're coming in now. And it'd be like, yeah, all right, so that thing that we needed to build there, it's just not in the show tonight. It might be in the show tomorrow night. Let's hope the audience doesn't notice. And this is exactly how computer games work. So all of this kind of boils down to, how do you hold yourself under situations of extreme duress? And I want to also talk about the epic work week as well. But this line here is very important to me, is that failure is inevitable. And it's not really such a bad thing. We're all going to stuff something up sooner or later, you know. So if we reacted badly every time something was a little bit imperfect, then we would be pushing ourselves into these reactions all the time. I would have lost it multiple times in the last hour that I've been speaking already. When I hopped on at about 10:02 and no one was waiting for the lecture, I was like, oh no, what am I gonna do? Do I cancel the lecture? I'm not gonna speak to no one. And then a couple of people turned up. But I think either way, I was like, okay, if no one turns up, I have this lecture recorded from previous terms. What I'll do is I'll send an email to the course and say, apologies, Friday wasn't happening, but I have a recording here that everyone can view. So I was like, okay, that's a plan. But the other plan was, I'm going to deliver this thing to however many people come. So thank you to the 10 of you who are here right now. And I'm happy to talk to just 10 students at a time. That's actually a really good ratio for teaching. I mean, knowing that there are 10 people, I could actually have switched this over to something like Blackboard Collaborate and had an actual conversation with you, but it's hard to do mid-flight, and also this is being recorded for a lot of people who are going to watch it after the assignment's due. But there are many ways that I could have reacted badly to that. So I could have turned off the stream, hopped on WebCMS and created a notice and gotten angry with people for not coming. Which is a deeply ironic thing to do, to get angry at people for not coming to something that I said was optional. But that is a reaction that someone could have in that situation, you know? So what I say is that I don't even consider it a failure, but I don't really consider anything a failure because I like learning about things by getting new results from things. So let's say if it was a failure, my failure to convince people to come along to this lecture. What's more important is how I deal with that, not whether or not that failure happened. So what I'm doing now is I'm still delivering something that I consider to be the level of quality that I wanted this to be, regardless if there's hundreds of people or 10 people. I don't think that makes a huge difference. You know, if I'm teaching 10 people really good content, then those 10 people are just getting good content out of that. Whether or not the full 500 people in the course come to every single thing I do is not something that I'm going to let affect me. So I'm going to say that if getting a very small number of people in a lecture is a failure, then my recovery and my reaction to that failure is to deliver the best content I can for these 10 people who are here. And I think that you'll get into these situations as well. So you will look back on some work you've done and you'll say, that just wasn't my best work. And there's many different ways to look at this. So some people could look at not doing their best work in, say, assignment 1 in COMP1511 and say, this means that I'm bad at computing and I'm permanently bad at computing and I'll never be good at computing, and so I'm going to walk away at this point. if you're walking away from computing at this point because of that, because you know you put everything in and you know that at this time in your life this isn't working for you, I understand that, because that's you dealing with this potentially this impossible situation, and you're thinking about it rationally and you're making a plan to go and do something else. If you're just unsure of what you can do, if you're comparing your marks to other students in the course and you think that because your marks are lower than someone else's, that you're a failure and things, then that is a difficult thing, and that's something that I think that you shouldn't necessarily get too deep into, because that means the reaction to the failure is driving you into behavior that is not in your best interest, you know? But if you can maintain clear thinking around things, because I mean, the whole idea of failing a course at university, like, people are very scared of doing this. I failed a course in my degree, by the way. One can fail a course at UNSW and then end up being trusted to teach other people. In fact, personally, I don't really trust people who haven't failed something. Because how much do you know about yourself if you haven't failed something? If you're succeeding at everything, you don't know if you're lucky or you work hard. If you've succeeded at some things and failed in other things, you know where your line is. So I know where my line is. I know that if I don't turn up to class a lot of the time and I don't do all the assignments, then I fail a subject. Now I know what to do. So that kind of failure was actually really good for me as a student. It turned my whole career, my whole career, yeah. I was going to say it turned my whole student experience around, but it actually turned my whole career around, because if I hadn't had that situation, I wouldn't have learnt as much. Because failing something at university gives you some really good perspective on what it means to deal with that failure, what it means to react to it. The lecturer in charge is here to say hello. Hello. Okay. So, the other thing I wanted to talk about, let me actually go to the next slide, because I'm sure I've got some text. Oh, no, I don't. I changed the format on this one. So, the other thing I want to talk about is actually what's in this meme here. The idea of, like, potentially having an 80-hour work week. 80 hours is a very long work week, but anything over 35 hours is considered, like, you know, more than a full-time load. And a lot of companies will expect that from you. A lot of jobs will, I'm just gonna give you a little taste of chicken while I'm talking. You will potentially get into situations where your job must need to be survived rather than fulfilling you and letting you flourish in what you do. So I think a lot of people are potentially feeling this with their degrees as well. And we're halfway through term 3, so everyone's tired. Trust me, I'm super tired as well. I've been teaching continuously since February and I need a break. But we all feel that right now. So no one necessarily needs to be alone in this. Know that we're all in this together. But there will be situations where you have to think about what you're doing and decide whether or not this is in your best interests. Because as much as a lot of companies are going to be really nice to us when we work, a lot of the time no one else is going to look out for us but ourselves. Not all the time. Sometimes you've got really, really good mentors around you. You've got good management around you who are really looking out for your well-being. And honestly, if the company is what is putting all this pressure on you, then it's the company's responsibility to look after your well-being. There's a whole lot of stuff around nowadays about mental well-being and stuff, about how we as individuals can look after our mental health. And it's very, very good to think about that. It's very good to think about your mental health. But it's also good to think about, is my company actually caring about me? Because when you get to a point, and everyone's going to get this sooner or later, sometime in their career, you're going to work for an institution or a company or working for people. And based on, after the time you spend with them, based on the way that they treat you, you realize that you're a resource to them. and not a human, then know that it's okay to walk away from those things. Know that in those situations, there's no reason to continue pouring your heart and soul into something that's just going to eat it up. Yeah. So I think that's an important thing to think about, especially, I was saying earlier that a lot of us think having a job is very important, and a lot of us think that the first goal on leaving university is to just get a job, no matter what job it is. Know that the second goal after that is, after you've spent some time in that job, the second goal is to try to think about what job you really want to do, what job's going to make you happy and fulfilled, and seek that out. If you're really lucky, the first job you hit is giving you those things, and so you can be happy there for a while. But in the end, you do want to at least find something that gives you life. I don't know a better way of saying it. It makes you feel like you're doing the right thing in the world that you want to do. Okay. I'm gonna put my face here. I'm pretty much lined up with where he is. Sip some tea. I'm just drinking water, but I just like the term. Okay. So, technical skills. And this is funny, right? Because I put this last in the list. And I put this last in the list because other people put this last in the list. There's a friend of mine I was talking about who is running a company like 20 or 30 people, about half of which are programmers, that kind of thing. Technical skills are important, yes. I'm not going to say technical skills are not important. But one thing about your university education is you will find that when you finish your degree, you're going to be in a situation where your technical skills are honed. And it's really funny because people think that they're not very good at things. But I will often compare fresh graduates. I can't really compare other fields, but programming, I will compare fresh graduate programmers. If I look at decent, fresh programmers, so the ones that are potentially going to get hired straight off the bat, I can't guarantee that, but depending on the time and place you find yourself in, the ones who are going to get snapped up by companies, and I look at people with 5-10 years experience in work, I would nearly, depending on the situation, I would nearly bet on the grads in terms of being technically better than the people with more experience. Sometimes the people with more experience know one thing really well, but their breadth of knowledge has narrowed over time because they just keep working on the things that they're good at. Some of them have just not been focusing that hard on learning new things. So they may be working with older systems, with older techniques, and the grads are going to smoke them with their new skills that are coming out of fresh learning out of the universities and things like that. So I think it's always really, really interesting to think that. And that's why I say that the technical skills don't really need to be your focus when you're thinking about how you want to act and how you want to carry yourself. Chances are your technical skills are probably going to be really, really good as you leave university. So that's why I put this at the end, and that's why I've got this hilarious meme here of the, I don't know what they call this one, the coffee guy, having an awkward opinion and saying, this is what I reckon, change my mind. So this is a little further than what I'd definitely say. I would say that, human skills and technical skills, you need them all to work as a technical professional, but at the same time, working on your human skills is something that you probably want to do more. So this comes last in the list because it's still on the list. It's still one of the pillars by which this thing is, by which a professional is built up of. But it's not as important to work on as the others. And again, I use the examples of friends saying that so long as someone has shown the capability to learn and the willingness, then we'll take them if they fit in with our company. And fitting with the company means, can they communicate with us the way that we want to be communicated with? Can they fit into one of our teams? And will the team be happy with this person in them? If you don't tick off those boxes, chances are that particular company will not want you there. So I find that interesting that will be the filter. And then they'll look at someone's technical skills and say, oh, is that actually what we need or not? Doesn't matter, we'll figure that out. And this is the funniest thing, is when people are applying for jobs and they look at the list of criteria, and like the list of criteria is something like 8 programming languages and like experience with all these different management systems and stuff like that. And then when you talk in the interview, and like, well, if you get to the interview, a lot of people don't even apply when they see a shopping list like that. But the funny thing about the list of skills that people put in job descriptions when you're looking to apply for jobs is they put the stuff in there for the dream perfect candidate. The dream perfect candidate, strangely enough, we know this doesn't exist. If you get that dream perfect candidate, you're like, oh, let's snap them up. But usually people can apply for those positions without ticking all the boxes. You can at least try. And it's funny because you'll get into situations where you get along really well with the people in the company. Maybe you've even got a friend in the company who's referred you for that position, and people are like, look, let's just take this person because they seem good. You know, they can communicate well with us. They fit in the kind of work culture. Work culture is like a buzzword that people use a lot of the time. But they don't have the technical skills we're looking for right now, but we reckon they're going to be good enough to do it. So we'll just get them into our system. We know our system's custom anyway. Heaps of companies are like this, which means that it doesn't matter if they knew a lot of the language we're in beforehand. Since so much of our stuff is custom, we'd have to teach anyone who did it. So they're not going to take that much longer to get there. So yeah, sorry, I'm not really talking about technical skills now, but I think that, the technical skills are important, but less important to work on because you're going to get those during your degree. We're going to teach you that stuff whether you like it or not. As in, if I want to teach people how to be a good programmer, I can do this without teaching you C. So you're going to learn C in COMP1511 as a side effect of me trying to teach you how to be a good programmer. Because you notice a lot of my teaching is like, how do we break a problem down into its parts? Why do we use certain parts of C to solve certain problems? The decision of how to break something apart and which tool to use is what makes someone an effective programmer. The ability to construct correct while loops is something that is handy, but it's something that can be learnt quickly and easily. But the ability to take a difficult problem, separate it into parts, and then see which things you need to do first, and doing them the simplest way possible with the tools you have, that's the real skill. And I could teach that without C if I wanted to. But it's much better if we do it with an actual programming language and things like that. So it's interesting. So you're going to get your technical skills because this course is even going to assess you on C, but sneakily, I'm going to tell you this in advance, we're going to assess you not on your raw ability to use C, but your ability to use it to correct the right problems. So when we get onto difficult things, and you'll notice this, right? You should see this in the assignment if you're pushing through to the later stages. They have weird tricks in them. They're not about whether you can just manipulate the C that we've taught you. We're asking if you can see that the tools that we've given you can be used in particular ways. So the harder stages of the assignment are more about your problem-solving skills, and then skills like testing and debugging and things like that, than they are about, can you just construct a double while loop in a 2D array, Because those are the simple tools, but what's more important is how good you are at using those tools to do weird things. Can you get creative with them? All right. So a couple of things about resilience and survival and stuff. So there's a couple of other things I wanted to talk about here. You have an assignment due in 3 days. 3 days? 2.5 days. This point's really good, what I've got here. Success isn't about getting everything done. Success is about getting through things well enough that you're happy with where you are. So there are techniques we can use to survive these difficult situations, the ones that put a lot of pressure on us, the ones that make us feel like we're not going to get through everything, and that's planning for how much you're going to do and how it's going to work. So we can get strategic with this kind of stuff. We can start to think about, how do I get the most marks with a minimum amount of time? In COMP1511, I'm going to say code style and clean basic functionality is going to get you there. Because when you look at the way this assignment is marked, we'll give you a pass for doing stage 1. We'll give you half of the marks of the assignment for doing stage 1. Stage 5, we will give you 10% of the marks for doing that. Stage 5 is harder than stage 1. So if you look at that, there's a massive asymmetry there in what's going on. And there are good reasons for that asymmetry. Because at the top end of the marks, people care a lot about these minute differences between them. Because if you're at the top end, you're going for 90 to 100 or something like that, you're in a competition. You've decided you're in a competition with other students. If you're going for a pass mark, then the thing that you are working on is, I want to know the things I need to know. So Mark, as the lecturer, has decided these are the things that someone needs to know to be competent at this level of programming and to be happy about what you know and what you can continue to do. The pass mark is the only thing that's important. And people don't realize this, is the pass mark, or like pass to a credit mark, there is where you do your most learning. And that's where you actually understand what you need to know about programming and see, for me to say, this person can be a programmer. People seem to think that, like, to be a programmer, one must get HDs and things, which is a really, really weird thing. Because if you needed an HD to be a programmer, then that's a pass. That's how the difficulty of your subject is kind of calibrated. If I think that someone needs something to in the future be a good programmer, then that's what the passing mark is. So it's more about that than something else. So see where you can get the most marks, aim for what you can achieve, don't burn yourself out, because if you work so hard on this assignment that after Sunday, after the due date when you hand in, or maybe you don't hand in the due date, maybe a day or two later, don't hand in 2 days later. 2 days later I think is like 0 marks, but 1 day later you could still pass. It won't be a great mark, but you'll still pass. If you burn yourself out, we are starting new content on Tuesday and Friday, new content. There's labs to do and things. If you work too hard, you crunch, you burn yourself out, you end up in a situation where you can't continue any further. And the course needs to keep building up your knowledge of things, keep building up your capability of learning skills. If you're not ready to bounce back and keep going, then you're going to be in a situation where the marks that you earned in the first assignment aren't worth anything anymore, because you sacrificed marks in the second assignment, which is worth nearly twice as much as the first. So what I'm saying is, everything like this, when you're in difficult situations, can be prioritized. You can decide to mentally, in your head, delete stages 4 and 5 of the assignment, or even stages like 2.5 through to 5. You just go, nope, not even going to look at them, because if I go too hard at that, then I can't bounce back the next day and keep going with the rest of the course, right? Kat saying, don't have to answer this now. Do you have any suggestions with working when you've always struggled with imposter syndrome? Let me just... damn it. I've got a slide on that. And I was hoping it'd be the next slide, but I forgot that this resilience and surviving thing is 2 slides. I was totally just going to mic drop there and go, well, actually, I do have stuff to talk about. Let me continue talking about this. I will definitely talk about imposter syndrome. It's super important. Let me just... hang on, it's this hand. Don't panic. I always laugh at the phrase don't panic, because the phrase don't panic is something that you can't say to someone. It's like the phrase calm down. If someone's already angry and you say calm down to someone who's already angry, you're just going to make them more angry. So I always laugh when say don't panic, because if you say don't panic to someone who's already panicking, it does not help even in the slightest. If you say don't panic to someone who might panic in the future, it also doesn't help. So it's kind of funny. What can say though, when you're in over your head, or you think you're not surviving, or you think you're barely surviving, there's different ways to work out what you want to do. So take a moment to breathe. People get caught up in needing to work all the time. We are not actually at our best if we work all the time. We're at our best if we're well rested. So this is like my problem solving thing, right? Settle down, ease back, and look at the things that need to be done. Pick the ones that are easy. This is always what we do when we don't have time to finish what we need to be done. We can say, pick the things that are easy, pick the things that we can do that will have the most effect on the outcome, because we already know that we're not going to get the full outcome. A lot of your university assignments are not designed for you to get 100%. And people really need to sort of get into that mindset that we can do a significant amount of what we need to be doing, and we can do enough that we're happy with what we've done. We're happy that we've learned something, and we're happy that we can apply what we've learned, because that's actually what you should be doing with assignments. The marks are there to try to entice you to do that. I would love to release an assignment for COMP1511 and have it worth 0 marks. So I would love to be able to say, do this assignment because you will learn something from it. Do this because the skills that you get out of this are going to carry through a career, a technical career, because even just working through the assignment, you see that we broke things up into stages, and you broke things up into individual kind of functionality. That is a demo for you about how something as big as CS Paint that we're working on at the moment could be broken down into parts, you know? So even working through reading the assignment and not doing anything will teach you something. So I would love to be in a situation where what I offer students is not marks, is not something for your wham. There was a really, really funny post on the UNSW discussion Facebook group about 1511 being a wham booster, and so I joked that I was going to scale the whole thing down. I got a wonderful combination of laugh and cry reacts. I'm just like, that's how you know you've won the internet, where you get equal amounts of laugh and cry for something that you say. Yeah, so I would love to be in a situation where what I offer students is that the knowledge I'm giving you is valuable, and that's why you're doing it. You don't need marks. You don't even need to be assessed, because at the end of the course, you know where you're at. You can tell me what mark you get. This is an experiment that's been done before, actually, which works really well. I've actually used it with some of my students. I will talk to them about their assignment, and I'll say to them, what mark do you have in the assignment? And they're like, aren't you marking it? It's like, I know I'm marking it, but you did it, so you should know what mark you're going to get. And it's really funny, because the student would tell me a mark, and then we'd go through the assignment and see how well they met the criteria, see how well their code was working, how well it's documented and stuff, and then I'd give them a mark. I find it ironic, because I got a lot of really high-performing students who undersold themselves. And I was like, I think I've got a distinction. I go through and I was like, this is nearly a perfect 100. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't come to me and tell me this is a distinction. Don't chop 25% off what you did. Because what you're doing then is falsifying your work. And so I'm very angry about that. You know, so it's a good angry, but it's really kind of funny. Oh yeah, Kat's just asking, did people underestimate or overestimate? Well, yeah, they definitely underestimated. I think no one wants to brag. No one wants to sit there with their teacher and say, oh, I'm really good at this. Every now and then I'd have someone say, I really want to get an HD for this because I put in a whole lot of work. And so sometimes I'm like, just call it, you know, give yourself the 90 and we'll have a look at it, you know. And so we'd see, yeah. And so it's very interesting. And I think that that's actually a really, really important thing for learning, is this idea of self-reflection. You look back over what you did and you say, I did a good job here, I did a bad job here, and I know where I did a good and bad job and how I'm going to do things in the future. That's what learning actually is. Learning is flicking back and forth between creating things and assessing what your creation is. So you make something and you look at it and you see whether it's meeting your own expectations or not, and you say, these are the things I'm going to change about, and I'll come back. Okay. Next slide is for Kat. Who can become a professional? And I always love this bit. It's you. The answer is you. You can become a professional. If you want it, you can have it. I'm not saying that, though. I'm not saying that if you want it, you can have it. That's a dumb thing to say. That's led to a whole bunch of people in the world thinking they can have anything they want. It's not true. You can't have anything you want. You can decide to commit to being the best you can be. And if you spend enough time with that full commitment to learning what you need to learn, then you can get somewhere. That's what I'm going to say. The other thing that's very, very important is this idea of imposter syndrome, and this goes through a lot of people. It seems to hit people harder the smarter they are. I mean, there's some people who it doesn't hit. Some people are happily kind of traipsing through life going, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be because I'm better than everyone around me. That person's obviously deluding themselves, because anyone who traipses around saying that they're better than everyone around them is probably lying and is an obnoxious douche who none of us want to work with. So they're not the best. Because being the best is not being, say, technically the best, it's being the one that everyone actually wants to work with. That's the best person in the company. We always joke about if you want to get something done in a company, ask the person that's the busiest. So ask the person that everyone else wants to work with, because you know that they get it done. But anyway, I think it's important to say that no one knows what they're doing. I do not know what I'm doing. I am lucky, and in a sense you're lucky, because I'm repeating this content. This is now the 6th time I've given this talk at UNSW, because I've taught COMP1511 6 times in a row. So you're getting something where I've been able to refine this multiple times. I've been able to fail multiple times and refine it. But even doing that, so if I have a really, really simple goal, you deliver 2 hours worth of content each time you sit down and talk to people. You may notice that last Friday, my lecture example just didn't finish. And so, I planned that thing out. I wrote that content and I looked at it and I said, this is probably going to fit in an hour. I'll be able to do this. And then when it came down to it, it just didn't fit. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I don't really know what I'm doing. Sure, I can talk a bit, and I can capture an audience for a while, because I've learned a manner of speaking that is going to capture an audience. But that doesn't mean I'm a good lecturer. That just means that, I've got some tricks up my sleeve. And I think it's important to think like that everyone around you looks like they know what they're doing, but no one really does. We're all just kind of making it up as we go along. And meanwhile, while I've been doing all this stuff this week, so this week I recorded a podcast with CSE Socks, so that's going to come out. I'm not sure when, sometime in the next couple of weeks. I gave a talk also for CSE Socks. So I do a bit of stuff with the student societies. The talk yesterday, I was here's a 1 hour talk with a 1 hour Q&A, ended up in a 3.5 hour talk with a half hour live streaming session. And it was just how did I go so far off the rails? But that's just what it is. And in the meantime, there was a whole bunch of other actual professional administrative lecturing work that I was supposed to be doing in the background that just sort of is dragging on now, and I'm going to have to catch up with later. None of us know what we're doing. Anyone who thinks that they know what they're doing is potentially missing something really crucial, lying to themselves about it, or just trying to make it look like everything's okay. Sometimes people make it look like everything's okay just to try to make it okay for other people. Because sometimes we don't want to we don't want to like burn the house down around us, so we don't complain as much as we potentially could. But yeah, and I think it's interesting because like I talk to friends now, and so like friends who are in very senior positions in the tech companies that a lot of you as potential computer engineers or software engineers of the future are going to try to get jobs in these companies. And they say the same things as me. They're like, sometimes I'm just lost. You know, sometimes I'm at this point and I'm just like, I really don't know what I'm doing. Like, I got to this point in this job and I've had some successes along the way, but some of those were just luck. Like, sometimes I was just in the right place at the right time, you know? And so I don't really know what's going on. I'm just barely hanging on. And you're very, very rarely going to see people who are like, oh yeah, I'm totally comfortable with this. I'm just really good at this. Even people who are, you know, objectively really good at something, you look at them from the outside and you go, you're really good at this. You're really on top of this. It doesn't really matter because inside their head they might be like, I just don't know what's going on. And they may be like one slip up away from just throwing in the towel and quitting the job. And she's like, are they successful or not? It's like, maybe successful is the person who's doing a lot less work and is happy to continue doing it, you know? So this is something that is going to come up a lot. Imposter syndrome is this idea that people have. Did I have another slide on this? No. Okay. I will talk about that one next. The idea that we look around at the people around us and we think everyone's better than us. And then we say, I must be the fake. I must be the one who doesn't know what's going on. And sooner or later I'm going to be found out and kicked out of here. Is like totally that. Like, and we all think that. I mean, a couple of months ago I was talking in Discord with a bunch of students, actually. I was talking about things. And I said the line, I'm not even a real lecturer anyway. And I got all these weird reacts to that. And I was like, I'm just saying something. And I realized that was me 100% exhibiting the imposter syndrome. And I'm just like, there's all these people that like my content and stuff like that. They like what I'm teaching and stuff like that. But underneath it all, I'm kind of like, oh, I'm just the newbie lecturer. You know, there's all these other lecturers that have done these really significant things, and they've got these like big major research projects going. I'm not a real lecturer. I don't do any of that stuff. All I do is teach the fundamental level of computing. I'm just the intro lecturer. I'm not even the meat in the sandwich. I'm just like the one that starts people off in computing. I didn't even teach the hard stuff, you know. And so it was really weird that I was having that attitude. Because if I look at this objectively, I would swing back around, and if it wasn't me, I would have said, no, that Mark Chi guy is teaching the most important course in the school. And it's the one that sets the groundwork for everything else. But it's funny, when you look at it from the outside, you could pump yourself up. You could say, you're great, you're doing really good things. And on the inside, you're like, nah, it's not working. Just quit. It's not going to work. You're just not good at this. Just walk away, you know. So it's a really difficult thing. And as Kat, you were saying, this constant cycle of thinking you know what you're doing and then not knowing what you're doing. What I want to say is lean into that. Because not knowing what you're doing means that you're learning. If you always know what you're doing, it means you're stagnant. It means that you're no longer progressing with what you're doing. You're not learning any new skills. You're not open to change. Well, maybe you're not open to change, or it's not being given to you as an opportunity. The cycle of not knowing stuff, then knowing stuff, is a beautiful, beautiful cycle to be a part of. Because it means that you're on a path towards mastery of something. So when you're there and you say, I have no idea what's going on, you're in a much better position to the person that's saying, I know what's going on. Because the person that knows what's going on is not going to learn anything new. The person that's there and says, I have no idea what's happening, and often it's true, you're looking around and go, I have no idea what's happening. It means that as you figure out what's happening, you're going to kind of have more capability within the situation that you're in. And maybe you're even going to be able to apply that to other situations. But the other joy of that is that Once you learn about what's going on here, you're then going to suddenly realize that there's other things beyond that, and you don't know anything about them. And you're like, oh, that's really cool. We can do this again. And once you can get your head around that cycle of thinking that not knowing stuff is super important, and not knowing stuff is what is going to take you towards knowing stuff later, that's the joy of continually getting to master lots of different things. And this is why we go back to Eric's thing about 5 to 10 careers. A lot of the time, that next career is based on you finding something out in your current career and just going, oh, that's super interesting. How do you do that thing? And then you get really deep and you go, oh, I'm going to learn about that. And you pop out the other side of something and you just go, oh, I accidentally learned something really useful. And now I'm one of only about 1,000 people on the face of this planet who actually know how to use this thing. How did I end up here? And then you look around, you end up there, and everyone else is looking at you going, see, they know what they're doing, and I don't. You know? And then you're the one causing the imposter syndrome in other people. While the whole time you thought you knew nothing, and you were just like, I don't really know anything, I'm just going to explore this thing because I don't really know anything, you know? We're all in it. And I think it helps a lot to think that everyone else is in it as well. And it even helps much more to think that those people who look like they're not in imposter syndrome, you can don't actually make fun of people, because you may actually cause a massive nervous breakdown in someone who is right on the edge has imposter syndrome. But you see someone who looks like they don't have imposter syndrome, in your head you're just like, you're lying to yourself. You know as much as I do about what to do here. But you're looking at this other person and go, obviously, okay, it's fine. Your coping mechanism is to try to lift yourself above it, and that's good. That's fine. You do what you want. But I know that you're lying to yourself. I know that none of us know what's going on. And that's okay. Okay. So, I've dumped a lot of stuff on you today. Oops. I'm going to get my face out of the way of the text. I've given you a lot, I think, to think about, and a lot that is really not necessarily apparent immediately for what you can do to get better skills. Because soft skills are things that are learnt generally through experience, not necessarily through the theoretical learning that I'm talking about here in delivering a lecture. Lecture content's always very dense and theoretical. But to learn communication, one must practice it. So one must communicate to learn communication. To learn teamwork, one must work in teams. So these kinds of things are the things that UNSW, CSE, or wherever you are in UNSW is probably going to try to throw you into. It's going to throw you into situations where you need to communicate, throw you into situations where you need to work in groups. But if you really want to kickstart this, you can do it yourself. There are many, many teams that you can join around the world that you can learn about things from. I always like to joke that I learnt more about teamwork and management in World of Warcraft than I learnt in any of my courses. Granted, I was an engineering student, so I didn't do management courses, so I had to learn somewhere. But running guilds of volunteers is a very, very interesting thing, because you have no carrot to offer these people. You know, you can't say, we're paying you like $80,000-$90,000 a year, so we do expect something back from you. We expect some output of work. So when you're working with volunteers like that, you say, can you please do this? And they say, oh, I don't know. And you're like, oh, I guess there's nothing we can really do. And so you learn about how to work with your team rather than trying to just push your team to do things. So a lot of that stuff is stuff that that you can pick up with that experience. I mean, maybe slightly more practical sense. I'm not saying everyone should play World of Warcraft. That's a weird thing. But student societies are a great place. Student societies, I think, are really wonderful because they're held up by the university in a sense. They're supported by the university. They're not companies, which means if they fail to do something, so they fail to produce a product I mean, I don't know any societies that are producing a product, but companies generally are. And if a company fails to produce a product, you're in a lot of trouble because your bottom line is hurt. Sometimes you can't, if you hit a point you can't pay your staff, the company's going to go under. Well, maybe. See how it goes. Student societies can flounder, but will be supported by the university, which means they're a structure where you can work in a team, and it's often very much like a company. But the price for failure is not nearly as high, which is a very, very good place to learn. Learning should be done in situations where you feel safe to experiment with things, because if you're not figuring out where your line is, I was talking before about failing a subject. If you don't know what causes you to succeed and fail, then you haven't learned anything. And in order to figure out whether you succeeded or failed, you have to fail. I mean, chances are, if you just go about your business and do the best you can, failure is going to find you no matter what. But there's a term that people use a lot, which is like fail faster. I remember seeing a friend who actually tattooed that on their arm, so that like they would be typing at their keyboard, they could flick their arm over and they could read fail faster. And it was like, that's commitment right there. So that's the idea, that if we know that we learn the most from failure, then maybe we should be seeking it out. And I'm not saying that you should go join a company and tank it immediately by like sabotaging it or something like that. But you should experiment. You should go looking for ideas that are interesting. Not looking for ideas that are going to give you guaranteed success, but looking for ideas that you're going to get something out of it, whether you succeed or fail. And so the point at which you fail might be really interesting, because you say, oh, that's how that thing works. We didn't really know how that thing worked until we tried, you know? So I think especially when you're educating yourself, and I think that now as university students, you're very, very much educating yourself, but later on you will still definitely be educating yourself, right? So taking this kind of learning mindset to life in general is probably going to be very nice. You know, take a rest every now and then though. Don't always be putting yourself in a situation where you don't know anything and you want to push for it, but you know, learning's always really good. So, things that are going to be useful: getting experience with communicating with people. When you're doing stuff like code reviews, try to explain your code as if the other person or the people you're talking to don't actually understand C. So they don't have your expertise. Can you explain what your program does in simple human terms? That's really, really good practice. That's good practice for anyone who's in any kind of technical field. So, I've worked a bit with mechanical engineers, and it's so funny because like I was in the middle of a conversation with them and they just started reeling off acronyms, and I was like, I know I'm like a university lecturer and all, which means I'm supposed to be held at some level of expertise, but my level of expertise from mechanical engineering is flat zero, so I don't understand anything that you just said. And it's like, okay, so we need to think about how we do that communication. When you're in the teams, thinking about following as well as leading. People get into this weird concept that everyone wants to be the captain, everyone wants to be the lead, everyone wants to get to the point where they're running the team. The best person to run the team is the person who knows how to follow. And that's a weird thing, right? Because we always think about the people leading the team as the one with the biggest ego and the most bravado and stuff like that. It's usually not the best person to run a team. Usually the best person to run a team is the person who knows how people follow. Because they will know how to get people to follow, and they will know how to step aside when someone else has more expertise than them. And so that's a quality that you can practice in a sense, because what you will do is you will look at situations in teams and you'll think, do I push here or do I pull? You know, and even just starting to think that way about teams will make you better in a team than you may have been otherwise. Because some people always push, you know, push to be the best all the time. And it's like, if you push to be the best all the time, all you're going to do is push yourself towards a breaking point. And doing zero work, like pushing for 110% and ending up at zero, is always worse than having done 90% the whole time, you know? Because if you're consistent and you can keep going, you're usually going to be better off. I mean, this all gets thrown out the window if the deadline's like 12 hours away, but you know, still, even then, you want to know that you're going to hit that deadline and get a good night's sleep afterwards. Look after yourself, because looking after yourself is pretty important. As I said before, not everyone's going to look after you, but the thing in bold, this is the most important thing, is caring about what you do. So this is the thing that I say is like, commitment to what you're doing is potentially more important than your ability to understand what's going on. If you've decided, so this isn't going to be the case for everyone because we've got lots of people in different degrees here, but if you've decided, I'm going to be a software engineer, so I'm here in COMP1511. So if you're in COMP1511, you're at the beginning of the journey to become a software engineer. That's not entirely true. Some people's journey starts way earlier with learning other programming languages and stuff. But in terms of the way we think of your journey in UNSW, COMP1511 is the first computing course for a lot of people. So if you've decided that you are going to become a software engineer, then you know that this is a step that you must take along the way, and you care about the fact that this is an important step, and you care that you are going to carry yourself through this as best as you can. And that doesn't mean that you pass the course the first time. That would mean that you're committed to doing it eventually, which it doesn't matter whether you do it now or you do it later, or you do it in a year's time. You come back and you go, I didn't do it the first time, but I'm still committed to my goal, and I'm going to try to get there. So what I'm saying is, like, if you care about what you're doing, that's you caring about your work. If you care about the people around you, then you're going to learn how to work with them and communicate with them. If you care about yourself and what you want to do with your life, then you're going to look after yourself, and you're going to start ticking all of these boxes and all these pillars. And it all comes from giving a shit, right? I don't swear much, but sometimes I swear when I really want to make a point. If you really care about what you're doing, that's going to be more important than anything else. Because people talk about, like, motivation, like what brings people to put a lot of work into things. People look at motivation like it's a commodity that can be gained. Oh, that person has heaps of motivation. It's not what it's about. That person has decided that they want something, and then they've committed to doing what they need to do to get there. And that comes from caring about what they're going to do, caring about their future self. So it's like, I'm going to carry myself to that point so that my future self is where I want to be, you know. And generally you're not going to get there without caring about the people around you as well. So that is like the thing I want to boil down to. If you only get one thing out of this talk about all the different things we're talking about, communication, resilience, imposter syndrome, and all that kind of stuff, it actually really boils down to, do I care about what happens to me in the future? Do I care about the work that I produce, and do I care about the people around me? And if you go in with that attitude, then you can reach the goals that you're going for. The only thing I want to say is, you may not reach them immediately, but you've got to be okay with that. Because if you're committed to something, you must also be committed to the time it's going to take to get there. That is the thing that's going to be different for everyone. So you commit to something, you say, I'm going to get there, and I'm going to take the time it takes to get there. What's Kat saying? That's really cool. Fear of failure is really paralyzing sometimes. Yeah, totally. Especially with assignments where you think you're saving time by doing it perfect the first time. Perfection is a crutch. No, it's not a crutch. Perfection is a trap. Did I have any more slides? Yeah. Let me talk about more slides. Actually, that's my final slide. I gave away the joke just there. But let me talk about perfection. A study was done. This is a really, really famous study in education. We talk about this all the time. A bunch of students, I think it was primary school age students doing pottery, were asked to make pots. And so they took one class of students and they said, make the best pot you can. You just have to make one, just make it the best you can. And then they were given another class of students was told, we don't care about the quality of what you're doing. It's entirely unimportant, but we want you to make, I think it was 100 of them. It was a stupidly high number of them, but it was like, just make lots of them and we'll just see where you go. You know where this is going, all right? You know where this story is going, because when they looked at them and they figured out from the teacher's perspective, where the highest quality pots were created, it was all on the side of the people who were doing quantity. So the idea that you want to do the right thing first go is a trap, and it's the kind of thing that will lead you down into a fear of failure rather than the embracing of the failure and learning from it. So trying to get things right first go is very, very often going to lead towards a really, really low risk interpretation of things. So you'll go, what is the only way I can do these things? And then you get caught up in there being one way to do things. Whereas if you explore instead, you make 100 pots instead of one good pot. And you say, I can do anything I want with these things. I'm going to put it on the spinning, what do they call it? I don't know. The spinning thing with pottery, and then make it asymmetric somehow. I'm going to follow it around and make it asymmetric. And it's that's not even what that tool's for, but you may discover something really interesting about that tool by trying that. You may discover something really interesting about the strength of the clay and how it holds together. And that someone who would never think to use the tool the wrong way would never learn that. So there's so much value in that. So I think it's really funny where I could say, I don't really care about what you're doing. I just want you to write 100 programs in C, and at the end of it, we'll see how much you've learned. Have you seen how the labs and weekly tests and stuff are laid out? It's not exactly 100, but it kind of is. By the end of the course, you'll have written 100 separate C programs, all for different purposes, different reasons. A significant number of them will have been in a situation where you didn't have to succeed or not. Have you noticed the assessment scheme for the weekly tests? They're any attempt at the weekly tests passes that component of the course. So if you go into the weekly tests and write gibberish, you'll still get half a mark out of the mark for that. So a lot of this is designed just to try to get you into the situation where you just write lots of code. And we know that if you write lots of code, successful or not, you're just going to learn more about it. So it's that kind of thing. All right. Let me not cover up the Backstreet Boys. I'm just going to push myself off to the corner like that. So I'm going to say this follows on from what I was saying, just their learning is more important than success. Success comes from learning. So going for the cause is better than going for the result, So we want to build up a situation where we can succeed at everything, not just succeed at this one thing that's happening right now. So this kind of short-term, long-term thinking is what we're looking at here, especially because you're in university now. You've got a long-term thing to think about, your future career or careers, and how do you want to make them successful is how you're going to act now. Which means you don't have to succeed now to be successful in the future. Now's your time to learn as much as you can. So what I'm going to say here, high marks are cool. If you're getting high marks, congrats, good for you. You can see how much I care about marks. But it's not the same. It's not the same as actually learning stuff, and it's not the same as having this long-term fulfillment that actually gets you somewhere. So this is definitely a quote. It's from a very famous song. I don't care who you are, where you're from, or what you've done, as long as you love C. And that's definitely not misquoted, and that's definitely not photoshopped. It actually is definitely not Photoshop, because if I'd used Photoshop, it would have turned out a lot better than that. So I just wanted to leave you that, because I think that to learn about stuff, you really want to be laughing about it most of the time. Every time you screw something up, you have a laugh and you go, haha, that code is so wrong. Let's go back and do something else with it. Because that reaction to failure, the laughing at our failures, is the kind of reaction that gets us happy about failing and happy about seeing that we could learn something regardless of whether or not something works. Getting stuff to work is it's nice icing on the cake, but that's not where you do your learning. Where you do your learning is making stuff that doesn't work and then fiddling around with it until you can figure out how you're going to make it work. So that's what I want to leave you with. Kat says it's going to be stuck in your head for the rest of the day. It is. It's going to be stuck in mine as well, and I'm not mad either because I think it's funny. Yeah, so hopefully I've left you with the impression that the stuff that is important to us, the stuff that's really going to carry us through life, is the ability to happily react to things that we thought were negative in the past, the things that we thought were failures. Those are the things that are actually going to teach us the most. Trying to win at everything is an attitude that's not going to get you wins. Trying to see how things work and being happy to lose in the situations where you learn how things work is what in the end gets you through to that point where you start winning and everyone looks at you and then thinks that they're the imposter because you keep winning at everything. And the only reason you got there is because you thought you were the imposter in the first place. And so you decided you needed to learn more, you know. So the whole imposter syndrome thing, thinking that I'm the only one that doesn't know anything, it's actually a little bit healthy. It's mostly unhealthy. It's mostly no one needs it. But it's a little bit healthy because it drives you to want to learn things. The idea that I'm not perfect, so I want to know more. I'm not trying to get to perfect though. I'm just trying to move in the direction. Because you're always going to be moving in the direction because nobody can ever achieve that kind of perfection. So anyway, there's my 1 hour talk that went for 2 hours. I said this wasn't going to take the full lecture time. It kind of has. I'm going to wrap it up there. However, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask some questions now if you like. I think I've answered the questions as we've been going along because there aren't many of us here today. So I think hopefully those of you who were here today have just been treating this like a conversation, just typing in chat whenever you want, because we can do that. I mean, when there's 500 people, not everyone can type in chat when they want. But this, I think, has been a nice little kind of intimate lecture, a little bit different from normal. So thank you for coming along. Those of you who came along today, I'm going to assume that more people are going to watch this afterwards than came along, so I hope that this was useful to everyone who's watching this later as well. I will see you on Tuesday, and good luck with your assignments. I hope that after this you're going to approach your assignment with a different mindset, that what you're trying to get out of the assignment is learning about problem solving, learning about techniques you didn't know before, and it's not just about chasing marks. And please don't try to 100% the assignment unless you're actually in that position where 100% the assignment is actually feasible. For a lot of people, it's entirely unnecessary. You're going to pass the course fine without 100% in the assignment. Okay. See you all next week.